Okay, so we've got three different kinds of lenses that cover every lens basically that you get. You have the wide angle lens, you have the standard lens, and then you have the telephoto lens, okay? So wide angle, standard lens, telephoto lens. Within that, you have a prime lens, and all a prime lens means is that the focal length of the lens doesn't change. So you can't, it's a 50mm, it stays at 50mm. The other type of lens that you get is a zoom lens. Now, a lot of people think a zoom lens is always a telephoto lens, it's always a long lens. This one is. It's a 70 to 200, so it changes its focal length from 70mm to 200mm. But zooms don't have to be telephoto, they can be wide angle zooms. Okay, so you get wide angle zooms and you get telephoto zooms. So that's the two different kinds of lenses you get. You get prime lenses and you get zoom lenses in terms of focal length. Where does focal length come from? Well, it is purely the measurement from the film plane of the camera, which is that little mark there, to the front of the lens. So if I were to measure this lens, it would be about 50mm from the film plane to the front of the lens. If I were to measure an 85mm, which is this one, these are actually in the wrong order, oh, that's 24. So you do get some, because of the elements and they have a lot of glass and they do look a bit bigger, but the 85, you can see it compared to the 50 is longer because it's 85mm compared to a 50mm. And if you have this is a zoom, but a 200mm, you can see the difference compared to an 85mm. And the 300 behind me is really big because it's 300mm. So if you ever wondered why lenses are called different things, 50mm or 300mm, then that's why. It's a measurement of the lens. There are certain exceptions to that, but you don't need to get worried about it. Where do the different focal lengths come from? Well, it all depends on what camera or phone you've got. Inside your camera or phone, there is a sensor, okay? And the size of that sensor changes what kind of lens is. So this camera is a full frame camera, full frame sensor camera. So the diagonal across the sensor is about 55mm. That means that the standard lens for a full frame camera or a film camera, 35mm camera, is a 50mm lens because it's the closest lens really to that diagonal across the frame, across the sensor. If you have a smaller sensor, that diagonal is smaller. So your standard lens is going to be smaller. So a standard lens on an APS-C sensor or a phone or anything like that is going to be like 35mm. Okay, but basically once you work out that standard lens format on full frame, it's 50mm. On smaller cameras, smaller sensor cameras, it's like a 35mm. And if you have medium format or large format, then the standard lens goes up to sort of 85 and above. Once you worked out what your standard lens is, then anything below that standard lens is a wide angle, anything above it is a telephoto. So you get the three different types of lenses. You get the wide angle, the standard, and the telephoto lens. And then you get primes, fixed focal length, and zooms, which change focal length. And what do the different focal lengths do? So a wide angle lens, it gives you more in your field of view, as we call it, so it takes in more of the scene. But it does more than that, okay? Also, it distorts things more. So it kind of distorts and separates the foreground in images from the background in images, okay? So that's why we don't use them for portraits, because they're not very flattering. But they're great for, landscapes, getting in lots of information, and creating depth in a picture. Okay, so if you want something to create depth in a picture, you can use a wide angle lens. You can bring something closer to the lens and then have some interest in the background, and it creates a nice depth through the picture. Standard lenses are pretty much what we see in our eye, a little bit tighter than our field of vision with our eyes, but they don't distort really at all, and they're just a really good way of capturing the world around us. Everything kind of fits into a standard. They're light, there's not much glass in them, so the quality is very, very high, and they're really good to use. Telephoto lenses, they do the opposite of wide angle lenses in that they compress the scene. They have a narrower field of view, so you kind of, you're taking in a little bit of what you can see, and the longer the focal length, the more compressed the view is. So if you have an 85mm, or you have a 200mm, or you have this guy behind me that's a 300mm, as you get longer in that focal length, then you're compressing, when you shoot with it, you're compressing the foreground and the background together. So it's the opposite of a wide angle lens, okay? So what does that mean? It means that you get less distortion. It means that it's very good for portraits because it doesn't distort the face. It means if you want to bring two elements together, so the opposite of creating depth in a picture with a wide angle lens, if you have two things in an image that you want to bring together and squash together and really bring together, then you can do that with a long lens. It's an optical effect, it's not a Photoshop effect. You can get it in camera, you don't need to mess around with it in Photoshop, but you can do it really well with a long lens. The other good thing about long lenses are they can keep your frames really clean. If you want to shoot something and there's a lot of stuff going on round about where you are, then you shoot with a long lens and you can crop in camera, in frame, what you want, the important stuff that you're photographing. If you're on a phone, you know, if you zoom in, if you tap and pinch and zoom in, then it does the same thing. It's not quite as good as a lens, but it has the same optical effect. So if you do that, you can really choose what's in your frame a lot better. Wide angle lenses are great for taking in a lot of information, and that's great if that's what you want. So yeah, that's the different things the lenses do. The other thing about lenses, the wide angle lenses, is depth of field. You get much better depth of field on a wide angle lens. What do I mean by depth of field? Depth of field, and we'll go into this more in another time, is the amount of the picture that is in focus from the point of focus behind and in front of it. So that's it. In a wide angle lens, you get more, and it's easier to get more in focus from the point of focus in front and behind. In a long lens, a telephoto lens, then you get a much narrower, smaller depth of field, much smaller bit in focus of the picture in front and behind of where you focused. So if you focus on a person or an animal or a kid or an object on a telephoto lens, the bit in front and behind of it are going to be out of focus a lot, and that's going to be more pronounced than on a wide angle lens. So if you want to shoot something that is isolated against its background, then you go for the longer lenses. And if you want to shoot something the way you want full depth of field, you want full focus, full sharpness all the way through the picture, then go for the wide angle lens, and you'll get that. It's much easier to get that full sharpness all the way through. We talked about the different lenses that you get, the different types. You get wide angle, standard, telephoto, and you get primes and zooms. We've not talked about why primes are better or zooms are better, and everyone always asks this. Prime lenses tend to give better photo quality, better image quality, because they have less in them. They're doing less, they're trying to do less. So they have less glass in them, as we say. And so the quality of the light that goes through the lens tends to be kept higher, and they make for better pictures generally. But they are restrictive in what they can do. They're a fixed focal length. You get some very good zooms. Zooms tend to be a lot heavier and more expensive because there's more moving parts in them. There's more glass in them. And you do diminish the light quality. So if you take a picture on a fixed 50mm lens, for instance, and the exact same picture on a zoom lens at 50mm, then the prime lens will be better, but it's nothing to get worried about. The important thing to look at is not to get lenses that try and do too much. A lot of people buy lenses that try and do everything at once. So they often get like the 80 to 300, and it's doing an awful lot, and you can tell that by the aperture. So the bigger the aperture range, the probably is where it's going to fall down. So if you have like a 3.5 to 5.6 or 6.3 aperture, then it's going to, you can tell it's trying to do too much. It's not gathering the light. So the bigger the aperture on a lens, the more light it can gather. Now you do pay for that, but that's why some lenses cost a lot more, because they gather more light and the quality is better. Now you're asking, right, if I want to get a new lens, what should I get? Well, the answer to that question is always, what is your budget and what do you want to use it for? Okay, don't spend out with your budget, but ask yourself, what am I going to use this for, and what lens, what kind of pictures I want to take, and what lens is going to best suit me to that photograph. Okay, there's no point buying a lens that you're only going to use a little bit of. Okay, you're better buying a lens that really is tailored to what you're going to use it. So if you want to do landscapes, then wide angles are very good. If you want to do portraits, so you want a standard lens or a slightly longer lens. Do you want a prime or a zoom? Well, it depends, if you're going to be in situations that are kind of fast moving, or you're going to be taking a lot of equipment out with you, then, and weight is an issue, then primes are really good. But equally, if you're going to save, in fast changing situations, then zooms can adapt and are flexible with that. So, you want to just consider and think ahead about what kind of situation you're going to be photographing in. So that kind of sums up the first introduction to lenses. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'd love to see what you've got. I put some examples in this video of what I've shot with different kinds of lenses. So put in the comments down below, or get in touch and let me know how you get on with your different camera lenses. And if you enjoyed this video, please click like, and so you can find out when the next one's up, and also hit subscribe. Thank you very much.